Hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. Today, we're going to be doing a video interview, so you're going to be able to actually see our guest if you'd like, or you can still listen via Blog Talk. Either way, you can pass these along because I know our conversation is going to help you in terms of living with dementia if you're diagnosed or if you're caring for a loved one or a business professional. We're going to be talking with Elvis Gardin, who really did some miraculous things with his own mother living with the disease, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But first, I always like to just thank each and every one of you who are our listeners and our followers. You have spread the name of Alzheimer's Speaks around the world, and for that I can't thank you enough. As a daughter who had a mom who lived with dementia for 30 years, I was adamant about trying to make a difference and trying to connect everybody to all the resources, tools, and products that are out there that we just don't know about. And, when you get hit with dementia, you don't know what you don't know until you know you don't know it. and so hopefully we're going to make that path a little bit easier for you. I do want to just give a shout out to Dementia Action Alliance. They're having their second North America Conference this June, the 20th through the 22nd, down in Atlanta, Georgia. And you might want to check them out. You can go to DAA now for more information on that conference and all the other wonderful things that they provide as well. So let me go ahead and introduce our guest today. We have Elvis Gardin with us, and he cared for his mother and really went the distance, who was living with Alzheimer's. He actually moved back home and removed her from an assisted living community where she was at. And Elvis turned his mother's life around the best way he knew how. And he's going to tell us exactly what he did and why he did it. His mother has since passed at the age of 90. But he has taken the knowledge of his journey and authored a book called Dimensions of Dementia, a journey about love and life between a mother and son. So welcome, Elvis. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing real good at this end. Elvis, I want to start out with you telling a little bit about your mom's diagnosis. How long was she living with dementia, and how did that affect you as a son?
My mom was diagnosed with dementia at the very end of 2007, and I was not living at home at the time. She was living by herself. And once the doctor said that she would need 24-hour supervision, I have 3 older siblings. They didn't step up to the plate. So I moved back home and did what I needed to do. So she was diagnosed. I moved home the end of February in 2008, and she passed in May 2017.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that transition was for you to make that commitment to move back home? I mean, that's a big step for anyone.
It was a very difficult decision to make, Lori, because my mom, I grew up with a bipolar mom. So I endured all of that from a child into adulthood, in and out of psychiatric wards and, on antipsychotic meds and mood stabilizers. So that was, in and of itself, a whole other book. When I thought I had to move back home, I wasn't happy because I had finally gotten my freedom and took off. I was working in New York City full time. It wasn't something that I wanted to do at first because Alzheimer's wasn't completely foreign to me because in college I had studied on Alzheimer's in our pathology class. So I was somewhat familiar with it, but when you're actually in the trenches with it and you actually see your loved one, especially your mother, and she's starting to slip and repeat things and leave things on the stove and, things of that nature. And I would actually say that the very beginning, the onset of her dementia was the worst part of it, if that makes any type of sense, because she was resisting it and she still thought she could do certain things that she had normally done, chores around the house, et cetera, but she was losing her ability to do that. So that was very daunting to watch and to see her slipping slowly.
I can totally relate to that because I remember my mom lived with the disease for 30 years. And in the beginning, I mean, it's just, I can't imagine how scared they are, you know, to be noticing that things are changing and afraid to tell anybody about them because you don't want to, you don't want to bring that to the spotlight. And then when the doctor starts talking about it, your son's moving home and other people are noticing. It's one thing when you notice yourself, but it's another thing when other people start noticing it. And I'm sure they just feel like their whole world is starting to shrink in, and where is this going to go? And is anybody going to support me through this? And am I going to lose my independence and my personhood? Is that kind of what you were seeing too?
Well, it was, and I likened it to if there's something that I need to say and I can't think of what I was going to say. But for them, it's insidious and it starts out little by little, and then it grows to 12 hours, and then it grows to 24 hours. And before you know it, they're forgetting things that they want to say from their frontal lobe, their short-term memory patterns. And so it was really scary, and I didn't have the support of my siblings as promised. And it was a really rough road in the beginning. It was very frustrating. I
can understand that. I had an older brother. I still have an older brother and a younger brother. But I was the primary, after my dad died, and I supported my dad through the process. And I think it was looked at for me, well, you're the girl, you're supposed to do that and things. But, we didn't have the dynamics of living with a bipolar mom either, where a lot of people just say, I can't do that. That's not healthy for me to get back into that situation. And that must have weighed heavily on you.
It really did. It because I dealt with a lot with her bipolar disorder. And I had my own demons and my own, I won't say psychosis, but I had my own things that I needed to work out within myself in therapy. And I felt like I didn't have a chance. She went from that. Her last nervous breakdown was in 2003. The doctors then said there was a prognosis of the possibility of dementia onset. So it was actually all the way back then, and she wasn't allowed to drive anymore. She didn't try to drive anymore. And so I had to drive 45 minutes to take care of her. And I'd come down and make her food. I'd, make her care packages in the freezer. She was still capable of microwaving things at that time. And I'd go grocery shopping for her. I'd come down and do her hair for church, and just all those things, take her shopping, pick out bras, everything. So I really became her caregiver full on, I would say, in 2003. But I commuted back and forth, and I'd come sometimes on the weekends and stay with her. And by 2007, it started to progress, and I started to notice things when I would come home to visit. And it's so insidious because, and I use that word again because it was sort of short-circuited. It wasn't just full on, I can't remember anything, I'm repeating everything that I'm saying. It was very short-circuited. It was a big decision that I had to make, and I had to break my lease when I did that. I mean, at that point, I think in school I learned that bipolar disorder is a cycle of events. And when they stop taking their medication, it's just part of the cycle. I thought my mom was using emotional blackmail to keep me near and dear. So I had resentments about the bipolar disorder until I went to school. In college, that's when I learned that it was part of the cycles. So when I moved back home in the winter of 2008, I kind of felt empathy and compassion for her because I knew she was much older at this point and she really couldn't help herself. And so it kind of turned into a labor of love early on, and I just dove into it. I hired some friends because mom was private and I was private, and it was during the beginning of the recession, and I had a couple good friends that she trusted who were out of work. So I would pay them to watch her, and I would make her meals and everything. And I would go to work in New York City. We lived in New Jersey, in central New Jersey at the time. It really took some major adjustments on my part very quickly.
Well, I can just imagine that. It was nice that you had friends to be able to help out and to be able to support you through that. Now, did you keep her at home the whole time?
I kept her at home for as long as I could, for as long as it was safe. Because I would be in the middle of a shift at work and get a phone call from my neighbor that my mom had locked herself out. At the time, she was capable of, I enrolled her in adult daycare. So during the day, she was at adult daycare. Someone would be there at the house when she got off the bus, and she knew how to come into the house. In the morning, I got her up, got her ready. She was still able to bathe at that time on her own. I would pick her clothes out, get her dressed, get her nice and pretty, and put her on the van, and she would go to adult daycare. And she would get home at about 3 p.m, and I didn't get home from work until about 9:30 at night. So I had someone there in that gap of time. She was able to do that, but then she would try to cook for me because she thought I was her husband. She thought I was my dad. So she would try to cook, and it was a nightmare. And eventually she began to lose her key at daycare. So she would wait at my neighbor's upstairs, and sometimes I would have to leave work early and drive back to New Jersey to let her in and, just be there with her. And then other times, the people I had caring for her while I was working, they had a key as well. So it was quite an experience.
Well, one of the things that I like that you said was, you said, I kept her home as long as it was safe. And a lot of people don't put that safety into the equation, and it's so critical because it has to be not only safe for them, but for you as well. Right. And there's so many different levels of safety. So when you felt that it wasn't safe anymore, can you talk about how you went about picking a place and what happened once she moved?
Mom and I always had this pact that I would never put her in a nursing home or anything like that. However, I have a cousin who's a CNA, and my aunt lives in North Carolina, and both of them would occasionally warn me that if anything happened to her, I would be liable for it. And once she began to leave things burning on the stove, and then once the gas was on and the neighbors smelled gas and called the fire department, once she began doing things like that, she wasn't a wanderer. Only once did she wander, twice. Once it got to that point, and I was just worn out at this point because I didn't know how long this would go on. I mean, your mom had, dementia for 30 years. I can't imagine. And, I had other friends who had parents who were in their 90s and had had it for 15 years. So I thought, wait a minute, I just got the dream job of my life. I don't know how long this is going to go on, and I don't know how safe this is. I'd gotten a child safety knobs from Kids R Us or Babies R Us, and it just got to a point where I had to really, really pray about it and make a strong decision and stick to that decision. So it took me well over a year to find a place. I was so protective of her. And I had worked in a nursing home when I was in high school. So I knew some of the horrors of nursing homes. And I would go to them, and I advise this to anyone, go when they don't expect you to show up. Because that's when you really see the goings on in there. So none of the places were good enough. And then I struck a deal with a place in Cranford, New Jersey. And I got all the paperwork ready. I got the power of attorney ready, the advance directive, and proceeded with that. And so that was actually September 1st, 2010. So I was with her for a good 2.5 years at home. And it was the hardest day of my life because I had to prep her for it and just tell her, Mom, what do you think about being around people that you can have fun with, that you can, and she's like, well, I want to be with you. And that cut like a knife. And I'll never forget the morning that I was bringing her in. We went to breakfast and we were at the diner and she was in such a cheerful mood. And I just felt so guilty that I was tricking her. And I just remember sitting there just staring in a daze at her as she was so bubbly. My mom was a spitfire. She was so spunky. Everyone loved her all the way up till the end. And she was just so happy. And I knew what I was about to do. And we went to the facility and I checked her in. I admitted her. And as soon as we walked in, she looks around. It was a beautiful place. They had aquariums and birds and fish and all through the corridors. And she walks in and goes, "This is great." And I went, "Oh God, thank you." And I just exhaled. And so I had to, because she followed me like a Siamese cat. So I had to trick her into going with one of the CNAs so I could dash out the door, and that was the most painful time for me. I just broke down and just wailed in the parking lot. I couldn't believe it. My world was not going to be the same. We were not going to be together again, so I thought. And that devastated me.
It's a hard moment in time when you make that decision, no matter how right you are, that this is really the best decision that's available to you. Now, what happened once she was there, and how were you reunited again? Why don't you get into the story of what happened?
So she was there. She enjoyed herself there. I was there all the time. I would take her out. We would go out and do things. And she never once complained about me putting her in there. And the irony of it is, Mom developed a thrombosis in the back of her knee. It was a clot. And what I had learned was that they weren't giving her the physical activity that they proclaimed or professed that they give them, 9.5 activity hours. So I went on a work trip, and I came back a week later, and her foot was swollen, her ankle was swollen, her leg was swollen. So I insisted that they get an x-ray tech in there. And turns out she had a clot. They couldn't remove it because she was anemic. So they gave her a transfusion. She was in the hospital for about 2 weeks. And the doctor was going to release her back into the assisted living facility. And I said, "Oh, no, you're not. She's got to have physical therapy." So when I insisted on that, that's when he put her in rehab. So at this point, I really believe in my heart of hearts, even though I've inquired about it And it's been said to me that it's not possible. I don't believe it. She was vocal up until the blood transfusion. I almost want to say that they gave her too many cc's at one time because she went into a vegetative state and dysphagia setting. She went into a very vegetative state, and it was very frightening. It was almost as if she had suffered a mini stroke or something. So in rehab, she was out of it. The doctors and the physical therapist, the social worker, and the head of the physical therapy department of rehab, they were all on a panel, and I was sitting across from them, and they called me in to let me know that Mom was entering advanced stages of Alzheimer's and that she was never going to walk again, and she was too combative, and they couldn't work with her in physical therapy. And I said, that's bull. She was just dancing to James Brown last month. No way. And so they looked at each other, and they looked at me tongue in cheek and said, well, if you think you could do better, you can come in. And I said, okay, what time do you open? And they looked at each other like, is he serious? And they canceled on me the first 2 days. The third day I went in, I went up to her room. I said, Mom, you're 84 now. You've lived a long, incredible life. Do you want to live or do you want to die? And she looked at me with a frail voice and she got out, I want to live. And I said, okay, well then do as I say, work with me, and you'll live. And I wheeled her downstairs to physical therapy, and she was already atrophied and her feet were curled in like someone with cerebral palsy. And I had to teach the physical therapist how to get her out of the wheelchair and get her to walk down the hall to me. And that was the beginning of her walking. And then we did cognizance tests with cones and different things and balls. And before I knew it, she was ready to go back to living. And from that point, I just kept walking with her, taught her how to walk with the walker. And then she was like Forrest Gump. You couldn't find her. I'd go to the facility. I'm like, where's my mom? They're like, oh, she's walking around somewhere. And she even went to a cane at that point. So I would go and I would see her at the end of this long corridor that her room was on. And she'd be looking out the window. And I would say to her, what are you doing, Mom? She's like, I would call her, hey, lady, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm going home. And I'm like, and she was literally looking into the parking lot as if she was waiting for a car to pick her up and bring her home. Unbeknownst to me that I would actually be bringing her home on December 15th, 2013 to live with me again. So it was incredible. Even that decision, because I was free. Once she was in assisted living, I had a level of freedom, even though I was there all the time. But I couldn't sleep at night. My conscience was bothering me. And something just laid on my heart. And I just said, I think I can do better than them. I think I can really do better than them at the facility. And so I really thought about it long and hard, spoke with her social worker at the community mental health center that I took her to because she was still going there for visits and blood work. And he didn't think it was a good idea, and he tried to talk me out of it. He said, people usually do that. And within 6 months, they're pulling their hair out and they can't get a bed again at the facility. And I said, well, it's a chance I'm going to have to take. I thought about it already. And I brought her home. I brought her home with me on December 15th, 2013. And in 11 days, I had her off 34 pills a day that they were pumping her with. I did a sort of natural chelation therapy. I had her juicing. And
that's incredible. When you took her off the medications, did you work with the doctor in terms of pulling her off, or did you just make those decisions yourself?
I made the decisions myself because what had happened was her cholesterol was high at one point, and the staff doctor at the facility was awful. And he still had her on blood thinners, and he had her on an iron pill that was making her terribly constipated. And I hinted around with her social worker, and I said, well, listen, about a year ago, 2 years ago, you asked if I wanted to take her off of the carbamazepine and the Tegretol because the dosage was so low. And they started her on Alzheimer's medication. But she was on those. And he said, well, she could have a reaction. I don't know if that's a good idea. But I had already, by that point, actually, she was home with me and I had already taken her off of them. I didn't wean her off of anything, which in hindsight, it probably would have been the better thing to do. But I had studied those medications and I knew that she was on such a low dosage of them that it wasn't really going to make a difference. She was so happy to be home that it was just mind-boggling how happy she was. She knew she was home.
I mean, I typically don't ever recommend someone to take somebody off their medications without a doctor's advice, but I know it's one of those situations. I hear about people doing it all the time with that. And when you're dealing with that many medications, that can get overwhelming as well. Some of our audience members might be interested in knowing what your background is in terms of schooling, that you knew how to, get your mom up and moving again and things like that. So if you could share that, that might be helpful for some.
I went to school at the Swedish Institute College of Allied Health Sciences and Eastern Medicine in New York City. And I studied massage therapy there and Eastern Chinese medicine. And as a result of that, I graduated into different CEUs and different classes. Prenatal, perinatal, I've helped midwives deliver babies. And working with doctors and physical therapists and chiropractors, I learned a lot as well. So over the years, that was 13 years. Over the years, I developed quite a craft. So I would work on her, and I taught her how to walk up and down flights of stairs again. I did physical therapy on her to the point where she was spry again. She was dancing. She was, at the age of 86, she was on a rebounder, bouncing in the living room, and that was some amazing feat, I have to say.
Let's talk a little bit more. You've got her at home and she's juicing. What did she think about the juicing? Was that something that she liked, or did she just trust you?
Oh, she loved it. And social media used to just stare in awe. I would have these huge mason jars and I would make these amazing juices with all sorts of superfoods, green foods and things like that, blend them up. And she would take that mason jar down like the bunny rabbit on the Quick commercial, the Quick chocolate milk commercial. She would drink it literally within 8 to 10 minutes. And she loved them and she had a great appetite. And I'm also a vegan chef. So she enjoyed the foods that I made her. And I put her on a plant-based diet. I took her off dairy products because I knew that she was lactose intolerant. And that was another thing the facility was doing behind my back. They were feeding her dairy products and she was lactose intolerant heavily. And so once I began to change her diet and we began to go for walks as the weather warmed up, she just sprouted like a spring tulip.
I've seen some videos of her dancing and kind of shimmying around and things. Yeah, which is always fun. I know with my own mom, I always got so much joy seeing those moments. Did you, when you're, as your mom then progressed, you kind of got her better and stuff, did she progress backwards again at another?
She did. And that was the interesting thing because people watched, social media watched. They saw people who had been following me as early as 2011, 2012, knew that I was contemplating taking her out of there, bringing her to live with me, because I didn't like what was going on with her. The oddest thing was that I know people say that it can't be done, but I'm here to tell you that we arrested the dementia. She didn't progress past that point. And she was very sharp. I would do things with her to keep her in the present. Like I had a little sponge ball and I would throw it at her and she would always catch it and throw it back, or she'd fake as though she was going to throw it at me and then she'd throw it, and I just did all those different types of things to keep her in the moment. And I would keep her in touch with one of her childhood cousins. They were the same age. And anything and everything that I could do to keep her in the moment is what I did. We would go to the grocery store and she liked to push the shopping cart. So I would do these obstacle courses in the aisles and make a U-turn and a beeline, and she would never take anything out. She would never knock anything over. She was great. And I kept her present. I kept her in the moment all the time. And she knew who I was. At this point, she wasn't calling me. She would say that some man lived in the house with us. Not when I brought her home from assisted living, but prior, when I first moved home to her place. And she thought this man was in the house aside from myself. And it was just she and I. So that stopped. She knew who I was. She would say my name. And for the first 8 months, I had a king-size bed. For the first 8 months, I let her sleep in bed with me because I wanted that connection and I wanted her to feel like she was being integrated back into a home. And I had no problems with that. She was my baby girl. So I just, she was so happy. I can just see her smile. It just lit up the room. And that went on for some time. And then 2015, in May, we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, because she was getting so strong with the walking. And I said, well, I'm going to need like a sprawling ranch, not this, railroad apartment. She needs room to walk around in the house when we're not out and about because it's hot down there. So I found a great place that was perfect for her with an open floor, and she enjoyed every minute of it. It was wonderful. It was really, really.
Well, one of the things that I think you did so well with this was you kept her in relationship. You lived in her world. You kept her present and active. So she felt like she belonged. She had purpose. And so often I think many of us who are caring, we forget about that element because we're so task oriented on doing things, but we're not always reading the signs like you read in terms of what brings them joy, what's pulling them out. And you really seem to have built on that along with, the dietary. Now, in your book, what can people expect to find in your book? Do you have recipes? Do you, how was it written? Some people write in a journal format. Other people write in different ways. What can they find in your book?
My book has a lot of rabbit holes. So you'll find in the book, in some areas I talk in present tense. In some areas I speak in past tense. In other areas, I'll speak in a sort of a journal fashion. So it's kind of a collage of different writing styles. I do speak about a little bit about her bipolar disorder, and then I do speak about what it was like in the beginning, what I went through with the doctors, what I went through in legal battles with my older siblings. I do speak about her only sundowning, I think, twice. She's only sundowned twice. And I speak about some of the nutritional things that I did, but I don't give recipes in there. I have another book that I'm working on that I had to put the pen down for a while because the emotional void of losing her kind of took me out of my writer's mode. I was able to write this book. I wrote 28 chapters in 2 weeks once I had a shift. I had to go back to New Jersey to where we lived and walk through the neighborhood. And I just broke down. It was cathartic and I purged. And I was staying with a friend at the time. And I literally just sat down and wrote 28 chapters in 2 weeks. And, you can find a lot of information, just things that I experienced with the medical industry, the way that I took control at the hospitals, because towards the end, she developed 2-stage 4 ulcers on her right foot. And so I got them to debride that. They wanted to amputate her leg, and I said, no way, no how. You're not going to do that to her now. She's 89 years old. Debride it, and I'll take care of it. And in 3 weeks, it was granulated. I used colloidal silver and all sorts of things, and the cardiovascular surgeon that I used is one of the best in the country. He owns half the hospital she was in. And he fist bumped me, and he said, I've never seen such beautiful scars heal so fast. And so we did that, and I talk about that. I talk about some of the run-ins I had with certain doctors who were elder discriminatory. They just don't really care once you pass 65 if you can't speak for yourself. If you can't advocate for yourself, then you're really in trouble, because they'll give you anything. They'll tell you anything. They didn't even tell us that she had stage 3 at the time, kidney disease. And that was something insidious that would have happened as early on as 2005, 2006, 2007. She was doing so well. My mom didn't even so much as catch a cold. There was a time or two where she had, what's it called? Not cellulitis. It's almost like gout. I can't think of it. Escapes me now. Starts with this. It's a CE, colitis or something. I can't think of it. And her hands would swell. And even with that, I took her to urgent care, and they didn't know what to do. I brought her home and did some remedies on her, which I do share in my book. They were just in essential oils, and I put socks on her hands so she wouldn't rub them the way that she would. And the next day they were healed. So there were a lot of different homeopathic things that I did for my mom that I do share in my book. But I will share the recipes. I am almost finished with the book. It's called Decadent Vegan. And those are all the recipes that I used. And I also have a mini recipe book that is geared towards people with kidney failure who can't take in more than, say, 2,000 milligrams of potassium because their kidneys won't flush it.
Well, that is very helpful. I think, you're so honest about the story, the good, the bad, that emotional roller coaster, the stories of family, not always getting along. And most families, they have their moments, some are constant and others are just moments, but that's a frustrating, draining time. How did your family respond to your book?
We have severed relationships. My 3 older siblings didn't come to their mom's funeral. So that was a matter of, I still really don't know until this day. And I just lost a brother, as I think you know, last week to multiple myeloma. And so there was no closure. They just didn't come because she didn't have anything to leave them. As a result of that, and they left me holding the bag like they always pretty much did, I had to bury her alone. My niece was with me. She was a godsend. My mom had 4 granddaughters, but only one of them, my niece Tanika, was there for my mom all the way to the end. But it was disheartening, and I was angry with them. I was very resentful towards them because they knew that I had really gotten the brunt of her bipolar years, and then to stick me with this. But at this point, it was such a labor of love that I didn't care if I didn't sleep. I mean, I'd go to the gym when I could, or I found my ways of relaxing, and I was eating such healthy foods that it kept my energy up, because usually the caregiver is the first one to go out. We break down, and if we break down, the whole ship is going to sink.
It seems like even though, growing up was difficult with having your mom be bipolar and stuff, and you stepping up, you really got the gifts of that relationship and were able to reframe it. And I know, my two brothers weren't very present either. It didn't hit me until one time we were talking, and I'll never forget, I was sharing stories with them, and they're like, well, where'd you get the stories? And it just hit me so hard, like, I was there. And then instead of being angry and frustrated with them, I just felt this great sadness because they missed all of that. And that was their choice. And, and I had just stopped trying to pull them in and thought I have to focus my energies to do what I'm doing. And this is sidetracking me. This great sadness for them for missing out, because I thought it was one of the biggest gifts, if not the biggest gift I'll ever receive in my life.
Well, the time that we had, I gave my mom the most incredible bucket list she never could have expected. And we drove to Asheville together, for our family reunion. We'd go all over the place. She loved to ride. She loved cars. And I had a Jeep. She loved my Jeep. And we really had a ball. I had more fun with my mom in her end years than I think I did growing up. We had a blast. And I knew she was happy. She just had a permanent grin every day. And I did regret for them that they missed out on that, because they're not in any of those pictures. They're not in any of those videos. They never came to see her. They called Adult Protective Services on me 3 times. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, saying I was abusing their mother when they didn't even know her favorite color. They hadn't seen her in years. So it was sad for them, because what she gave me, money could never buy. I mean, the love, the integrity, the commitment, the unconditional love, the humility of having to clean and change my mom as though she was my infant baby every day, and being able to just bear down and do the dance with her and just let her lead. As long as it was safe, I just let her lead. If she said, oh, I want to walk on the moon today, I'd say, oh, is there room for me too? And she'd say, sure, and she was happy. She was just such a very happy, it was like she rebirthed in that 4 years that I had her with me. It was the most beautiful thing. She really didn't suffer long at all.
I can totally relate to that. I just think it was, again, such a gift. And to me, it was almost, when I try to describe, my relationship with my mom, I tell people it was almost like a religious experience, because
yes.
You don't know how deep you can love and how unconditional in the different levels
right.
that are there. You think unconditional love is, you love your child, and, you don't think anything can beat that. But, over the years, that changes too. And, when you go through that whole end of life journey, I mean, there's just another level and another level, and you don't need words. You can just be calm and present and comfortable in silence, to always be accepted, to be able to give that gift of acceptance, because you're not judging anymore. You're just walking on the moon with your mom.
Towards the end, I had to put her on in-home hospice. And one night she began to hemorrhage. And I called the hospice nurse, and she came over. And they didn't want me to clean her up. They wanted to see where it was coming from. And it was awful. It was those types of things were the traumatic experiences. The hemorrhaging was traumatic. She fainted and went unconscious a couple times. Those were the times I thought this was it. And so one night, it was actually early in the morning, about 4:30 in the morning, I went in to check on her, and she had hemorrhaged very badly. And at this point, I was only giving her, I think I was feeding her with the peg tube. And she wasn't on morphine yet. And so the nurse comes over, and she's on the other side. We're on either side of Mom's hospital bed in her room. And I looked at her and I said, "You hospice nurses are angels in human suits. You're not fooling me. I see you. They're awesome. They were incredible." And so she looked at me and she said, "You're one to talk." And I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "Look, when my granddaddy was going through this and at the stage your mom is at, there were 7 of us that took care of him and we couldn't handle it. 3 of us were nurses and you're doing this all by yourself. You're the angel." And that's when it really impacted me, like, wow, what am I doing? What am I doing? Like, will I recover from this, you know? And I'm still trying to recover.
It's hard after you put so much into that relationship, and then when they're gone, I know I just felt lost, this huge void.
After the funeral, I just collapsed. I went to Calgary, Alberta to stay with a friend for 2 weeks. I just couldn't even be in the house anymore. And matters worse, we were renting the house. I knew that the landlord was selling the house at a certain date, and we had to be out by May 31st. She passes on May 11th, so you can imagine the hospital visits, the ambulance rides and all that to the hospital prior to her passing. And then I buried her on the 17th of May. And in doing that, I had 2 weeks to pack up a 12-room house and get out.
Oh my gosh.
You can't imagine. You can't imagine. And I mean, I really, really, her gravestone says, "It is well with my soul" on it. She loved to sing that song. And I love to sing that song. And when I was done, it was always well with my soul. It was all well. When I took her dress to the funeral home, my niece was down with her mom, and she had gone in her room to gather up, you know, earrings, things, makeup. And I knew which dress I wanted to bury her in. We get to the funeral home, and I go to hand him the dress and the bag of makeup, and he said, "What's this?" And I said, "It's makeup." And he said, "Oh, she won't need this." He said, "It looks like someone poured liquid gold all over her body. She doesn't even have a pressure sore. God has a special place for you in heaven." And those types of vindications was all I really needed to hear, because I already knew Mom was proud of me to the very end. You know, the last 3 days I was giving her morphine, and I'd have Ella Fitzgerald or Otis Redding playing in the room, and her body was breaking down. I couldn't turn her anymore. And she was such a clown. She literally did her shimmy shake with one shoulder and winked her eye like, "I got this, we got this." And I just looked, I was just in tears. Tears of joy and pain. It was bittersweet. But she knew who I was till the end. And I mean, even in her hospital bed, I kept it on an incline. And I began to sing Minnie Riperton's song, "Loving You," to her. And she literally, with all the strength that she had, she sat up as much as she could and started humming it back to me, mimicking. That was very difficult to hold back the tears. I had to finish up and leave the room and just go bawl.
Wow. What a journey. I thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it'll help a lot of people. I think so many of us feel alone and misunderstood, especially when we don't have family supporting us. It can be a really, really difficult thing to do. Now, people can get a signed, autographed copy of your book just by going to your website, dimensionsofdementia.com. That's dimensions, of dementia.com. or they can email you as well, and both are listed on the radio page and blog. We've got that all over. Well, thank you again for your time with us today, and I really enjoyed your book and enjoyed this conversation, as I know our listeners will as well. So thank you, Elvis, for all you did, not only for your mom, but for so many others. And it empowers, I think, all of us to hear other people's stories. It gets us to believe that we can make a difference and we can try something different and kind of follow that gut and lead us forward. So again, thank you so much.
Hey everybody, Jared Sebesti here, host of Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career 30 or 40 plus years, retiring on Friday, without methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.